towards the end zone. Underthrown, McCollum, touchdown. Trey Tucker to the end zone it goes. Caught! Touchdown, Armand Benz.
Bearcat Blitz. How we doing, everybody? A week one win for the Cincinnati Bearcats to kick off the 2024 football season at Nippert Stadium. Welcome into the show. I'm your host, Russ Heltman. He's my co-host, Neil Meyer, coming at you on a lovely Labor Day in the tri-state area. Hope everybody enjoyed their holiday weekend, enjoyed the big victory for Cincinnati, 38-20 over Towson to kick the season off. We'll dive into that, of course, on today's show. Get to some more other news and notes and take a slight peek towards Pitt and get at least the betting spread on the board, a tight betting spread at that. But before we get to all the action on today's show, I want to tell you about our presenting sponsor, Bet Online. It's the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of that $200K. When the game's over, head over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Bet Online. The game starts here. And you can start subscribing to us. Listen to us frequently on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, rate, and review there. And also on YouTube as well. Talking Cats with Russ Heltman. Neil, let's go and get the show rolling right now, my man. Cincinnati wins the day to start the 2024 season, although there were some clear black eyes across this performance that ultimately had the Bearcats winning 38-20, put up 658 total yards of offense. I'm pretty sure that was, I believe, one of the top 10 marks in school history. So the ball moved really well. Once again, Neil, we saw that all throughout last season as well. They were a top 20 team in the country in total yardage per game on average. So that was good to see Scott Satterfield's offense kind of picking up where it left off, so to speak, despite some stuttering, some issues in the second half against the Towson defense, some rough plays, some bad moments here and there, kind of left what should have been a 45 to 50 point offensive performance in the high 30s. And then the other side, Neil, 20 points allowed on defense and 17 allowed in that first half. I think a really head-scratching first half that ultimately saw them clean things up. They made the right adjustments in the second half, and they held Towson to just 3 total points in that following frame. Neil, this was a Towson team that you and I both don't expect much from this year. I think you still had them covering the spread. I had them easily covering the spread in a 56-17 win. To me, having a few days to kind of assess it here, it feels like a little bit of an issue-filled performance, but a performance that this team can build on with a ton of new players. I think there was like 26 different guys that made a tackle in this game. They made an effort the coaching staff did, get a lot of different guys experience and exposure in this system on defense and offense. So I think you kind of suffer a little bit on the scoring margin because of that want to get a bunch of guys access to the game, to get a bunch of guys into the action, and to ultimately get this program kind of sped up in terms of the type of guys that have had exposure to these systems.
Yeah, absolutely, Russ. And there's obviously a lot of things to take away there. Obviously, you mentioned the offensive side of the ball. I mean, yeah, anytime you put up 658 yards of total offense, I mean, you're in great hands there, but Russ, there was an opportunity there where they maybe could have eclipsed 700 total yards. I mean, you have the muff punt there by Michael Musari early in the first quarter, actually. And then there's some other drives there that later stalled, but there was opportunity there, Russ, where they could have finished arguably as the nation's leading offense after week one. Obviously, they're sitting at number 5 after their performance, but there's a lot of things that you really could take away from this performance. And I'll say it right now, Russ, I think the biggest thought after watching game one is the thing that you and I have talked about all offseason and what could be the biggest weakness of this team, and that was the defensive line play. It just seemed like they were really struggling to get to the quarterback. Outside of Jared Bartlett and Eric Phillips, I mean, they really, really struggled to get to the quarterback there and make things rough. And, I mean, obviously heading into Big 12 play, obviously with the status of Dante Corleone still uncertain, and then you lose Jalen Hunt and Michael Coleman for the season due to injuries, I mean, overall, they're going to have to find ways to get pressure to the quarterback. And obviously, the 3-3-5 technique, I mean, they just were not really able to get as much pressure as they would like to the quarterback. But there's still a lot of things to take away. But obviously, when you look down and you see that you've given up nearly 450 yards of total offense roughly to a team like Towson, 425 to be exact, I mean, you have to sit down and think like, okay, well, we shouldn't have given up that many yards. And for me personally, Russ, you might have saw this as well, but did it kind of look like the linebackers were kind of playing off a little bit to where they were able to like get 5? I mean, there was one point in time where Towson was averaging 6-7 yards per play. Like the linebackers were kind of sitting in the gap a little bit and kind of allowing them to really get those chunk plays.
Neil, it just felt like that was a result of the front three not getting push. Just the linebackers didn't have any gaps to fill. There weren't gaps to fill there because the Towson offensive line was already 2-3 yards upfield within a second and a half of the ball being snapped. And I'm glad you brought that up. There are positives to take on both sides of the ball. There are a lot of positives to take, and there are some negatives to take. I think the most glaring negative from this game that you have to be worried about, the biggest thing to be worried about, is the pass rush and just the defensive front as a whole. The ability to rush the passer, the ability to stay in your gaps, the ability to hold a front and be able to hold the line of scrimmage in the run game. Neil, if they can't do that against this Towson offensive line, which has some big fellas up there, and that was very evident with the big fellas on the inside going up against guys like Kamari Burns and Cam Rutherford. Rutherford, who had just a rough game in snap-to-snap action and outside of snap-to-snap action with some penalties here and there that cost them points down the line. But, you know, they need Dante Corleone. They need him really bad. They talked about it after the game. Scott Satterfield highlighted just the psyche benefits that Dante Corleone can bring to this team, just the way that they think about going out on the field, the way they think about filling those gaps that I just mentioned, those linebackers can fill. It's evident that they need Dante Corleone. They gave up 6.1 yards per carry on off of adjusted for sacks. They gave up 6.1 yards per carry on 37 carries. I mean, they were going at him all day long and getting 5, 6, 7, 8 yards almost every 2 or 3 rushes. And that's something that I'm sure the coaching staff knows they have to clean up, and this defensive front especially knows they have to clean up before they go up against a Pitt team that is going to be willing to ram that ball down their throat and run the ball 40, 50 times if that's what it's going to take to come out of Nippert Stadium with a 20-18 or 20-17 win, some kind of just knockdown, drag-out type of style. But overall, Neil, that was kind of the biggest head scratcher and biggest point of worry. I think you and I are both on the same page from the entire game as a whole. It's just, we knew they were going to miss Dante Corleone going into this game. We knew how bad they were rushing defense wise with Dante Corleone and Jalen Hunt last year. And it's clear that this offense is going to have to put up a lot of points this year to kind of stymie off this issue, at least until Dante Corleone is fully cleared. And there's just no definitive answer on when that's going to be. He might be out there in full pads clacking on Tuesday, and you got him ready to roll up against Pitt. He might not be back until October. We just don't have any real firm timeline. And that's got to be a big, big issue for Tyson Veit and Court Braswell and Walt Stewart, just trying to figure out, do we start implementing more blitz packages? Do we start implementing some more aggression with these guys that we know we can see them getting blown off the ball by FCS talent? We need to implement some more aggression to be able to stave off some of these issues of 15, 16, 17 play drive touchdown potential from the other offenses. Or do you keep doing what you're doing and allow Dante Corleone to come back and fit in seamlessly to what you're doing right now? It's tough. It's a tough scenario right now, Neil, for that defense, to say the least. Despite giving up only 20 points, it was a rushing performance that could have been a lot worse if the talent on the other side of the ball around that rushing attack at Towson was able to execute a little bit better.
Yeah, no, most certainly. And obviously that's been the question all offseason we've got, is the health of Dante Corleone, but nobody knows. As you mentioned, Russ, this could be a situation where we go check out practice tomorrow for media availability, and we hear from Scott Satterfield earlier in the day that Dante's going to ramp things up and be go 11-11, something like that, heading into Pitt, which would be great news. But obviously this is a situation where you're not going to get an update. It's one of those ones where it's got to be day by day. Every situation is different, but it's clear that they missed him up front. And I mean, obviously when you have a All-American 325-pound nose tackle who's getting first and second round draft look, it's going to be different when he's out there on the field. And even Scott Satterfield alluded to that. But overall, Russ, outside of the defensive pressure up front, I mean, 26 different guys on the secondary make a tackle. I mean, they're still seeing and figuring out what they have. But on the positive side, I really want to highlight a guy in Josh Minkins. I thought he had a fantastic day in the secondary as well.
Really good.
I believe he was a team high 6 tackles, 3 pass breakups. Overall, he was just all over the field, and that's what you want to see from the safety. And then there at that star position, you have to give a shout out to Jaquan Sanks for becoming the first true freshman to make a start at Cincinnati. Marquise Copeland did back in 2015, and I thought he had a great game too. Obviously, Scott Satterfield said, like, once he got to campus, he really turned a lot of heads. And I mean, it showed because he was listed on the depth chart, the unofficial 2 deep, as one of those guys that was slotted in at that star position with Mekhi Miller or Jaquan Sanks. And then Jaquan Sanks gets the start and he comes out and he takes advantage of it. But Russ, I mean, you're looking down at the defensive stat line. I mean, you're looking down, you see 26 guys with tackles. Jared Bartlett, we know what we're going to get with him. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with. 2 tackles for loss. It was great to see him find ways and disrupt the pass rusher and really get to the backfield. Antoine Peak had a low-key quiet day, 6 tackles, 4 solo, a tackle for loss, and a pass breakup as well. So that was great to see there from the secondary. Jordan Young, I thought, had a great day as well. But there were still some things there in the secondary that they could tune up a little bit more. And I think everybody kind of saw that. But overall, now you have the experience. You know what kind of pieces you're working with. Obviously, come Pitt, it's really going to be another question mark. Like, hey, are we going to see 34 guys rotate in on the secondary like we saw on the defensive and offensive side of the ball like they saw overall on the weekend, but versus Towson. So it's going to be curious to see what the defensive and the rotations will look like versus Pitt. Obviously, Pitt is a much better team than what Towson was, but it's going to be interesting to see, do 26 guys make tackles on Saturday? Obviously, you would like that number to keep those guys fresh, but it's going to be interesting. Some snap counts will probably be higher than what they were this week. But overall, Russ, I think this was the game you kind of needed to get the momentum rolling and just kind of see what you have. Obviously, first game in a new defensive scheme under Tyson Veit. You kind of knew you would have your ups and downs there going against a new opponent. Obviously, teams were finding ways to kind of weaken and find those soft spots in that 3-3-5. But overall, I was actually very pleased with the performance. Obviously, there were some things you wish you could have had back. There was an opportunity where Russ offense could have put up 50 points, but overall, you still come out with a 38-20 victory. Obviously, people wish it would have been closer, but to get things moving on the right note, I think that was kind of the performance you wanted to see heading into Pitt, obviously, to see what you're working with there on both sides of the ball.
Neil, come on, man. That's the performance. That performance,
not the performance you were wanting, but obviously the one where you were expecting to see what kind of guys you have on the defensive side of things. Obviously, with the new scheme, how that all looked.
Yeah.
Getting back to the 3-3-5. Obviously, there was a lot of times where they could have had some takeaways. They had a fumble. They had the fumble recovery, and they turned it right back over. There was a lot of things they could clean up, but overall, the 3-3-5, I was pretty impressed with how the 3-3-5 looked, despite some of those chunk plays.
I mean, 425 yards allowed against a team that had 9 penalties in the game for 49 yards. It's like I was not impressed by this performance by UC, to say the least. I would give them a C, maybe a C+ at best for this overall performance. But there were some positives, as you mentioned, and we highlighted them well there. Josh Minkins was great in this game. When you think about Jared Bartlett, he was great in his debut. Both Peak at pacing the team with 6 tackles along with Antoine Peak. About Jordan Young, nice day on the outside, had a nice pass breakup. I think he is trending up as a nice player on the outside compared to what he performed like last year. Simeon Coleman, another freshman, getting in there and getting tackles in. He played well. And then Harris Adams, Neil, this is where Cincinnati could maybe weather the storm, is Harris Adams. He was my number 1 player in terms of the overall PFF grade. That's what he checked out at in this game for UC, 80.1 overall, had an 85.3 pass rush grade, only 10 snaps though. That's what we kind of got the sense from Scott Satterfield was during camp was Harris Adams, big fella, over 300-pounder, only guy in the rotation on that nose tackle spot right now, over 300 pounds. And look at the kind of impact he gave them compared to the other 2 nose tackles, the smaller guys in Rutherford and Kamari Burns. If Harris Adams can give them, Neil, 15 to 20 snaps against Pitt, 20 to 25 maybe against Pitt, would be massive. Just so massive, because they need that type of big body in the middle to let these speedy linebackers be able to go to work and do what they do best. So overall, defensively, we get to the offense. My takeaway there after this break, it was a up and down performance, a tale of 2 halves. They buckled up well in the back half. And you know what? The special teams contributed to some of the issues and the points that defense gave up. I mean, the special teams, they missed the field goal, and then Michael Musari muffs the punt. That's 6 points you give away right there, on top of maybe 1 or 2 points more of just different return things that they messed up. So anytime you're giving away 7 points of expected on special teams, Neil, it's not going to help you cover spreads like 31.5 points. That's the say the least. Yeah,
and there was also a couple drives too that really kind of, you get the stop on third down and a couple lackadaisical penalties that Scott Satterfield mentioned. Obviously, right. Cam Rutherford had one. You had another one there on roughing the passer that kept drives going that ultimately turned into points for Towson there, especially late in the first half. I mean, they go on that 14-0 run, and you're like, oh, this is a lot closer of a game than what is anticipated. But despite the offense just pushing the ball, it just felt like at times the offense was pushing too quickly. Like, you get the home run hitter from Evan Pryor. It's like, okay, defense just got worn down for 6-7 minutes, it felt like. You get the one play, and it's like, oh, defense is right back out. So in those moments, you like those home run plays, but got to find ways to give those breaths to the defense when you need it, especially when those long drives are ensuing versus a team that was very run heavy like Towson was.
Right. Defensively, those are week one issues. Usually you got those weird mistakes, those boneheaded penalties, but we saw that all throughout last season too, Neil. And that's why I'm categorizing it right now as a week one issue, but I'm stuffing it in the back of my head because we all saw what kind of issues this team had at the end of last season. Stopping the run, number one, special teams issues, number two, and number three, the back end of that defense. The back end looks a lot better. They didn't give up a ton of huge plays. You had that slant route that went to the house, and I was a little worried about the
slant was man coverage too. So that was
and just the way he outran the entire defense. A Towson player doing that compared to what they're going to see speed wise the rest of the season, that was a little head scratching. But overall, I think things look a little bit better, but there are still those remnants of the big issues from last season that didn't necessarily get completely cleaned up on the field in game one. Get to some more takeaways from the action against Towson after this on Bearcat Blitz. My final thought here, and it's a positive one from this game, is the quarterback position, I think, has elevated one, at least maybe two full tiers when you look at all of the quarterbacks in FBS and what UC had last year in Emory Jones compared to what they have this year in Brendan Sorsby. It's Towson. I get it. There were some free, wide open wide receivers running around for some of these yards, but I thought Sorsby looked poised. He never really put the ball in harm's way that I could see. Maybe 4 or 5 of the 9 incompletions were overall missed throws from Sorsby, but you'll take that in a 31 or 32 attempt game. And overall, 22 of 31, 383 yards, 2 touchdowns. I believe it was a top 7 performance yards-wise by any quarterback in UC history. He was really, really good, Neil, in that game. I thought really clean, took care of the ball well, and checked out with a 75.8 PFF grade. We know Emory Jones did that in game one last year, his only 70-plus performance as a PFF grader in 2023. I'm a lot more confident that we're going to see 70-plus grades out of Brendan Sorsby consistently this year, just given the talent around him. And, Neil, given that offensive line, I made it a point to ask Sorsby just how nice it was having an offensive line that you know is going to, A, open up rushing lanes for you when quarterback runs are called, but B, and I should have probably put it A, most importantly, keep you clean, really, for the most part. He did not really get put on the ground much at all, Neil. I think maybe touched once or twice, did not get sacked in this game. And overall, it was a very, very strong opening performance from Brendan Sorsby. And I think the number one thing that you can take away was, to me, those throws and the way this offense moved the ball. I mentioned that at the top of the show. Another great yardage performance from this offense is translatable the rest of the season. And then you had Sorsby's legs and some different kind of personnel, some more dynamic personnel, allowing you to get touchdowns in the red zone. And a guy I think who could really unlock that red zone acumen, Neil, is Joe Royer. He was the second most impactful player for me offensively. Xavier Henderson led the team in receiving, but we kind of knew what Xavier Henderson was. We didn't know exactly what Joe Royer was. We were anticipating it from what we've seen in fall camp and the wowing scenes we've seen in fall camp. But overall, Sorsby, Royer, that connection, I think this offense and this passing attack can take a huge leap in 2024 and make this offense, Neil, have a ceiling that I would say is closer to top 35 top 40, then I would say the ceiling I had on it and the mid 40s to low 50s range nationally. I think this offense could really help this entire program get back to bowling range on its own.
Yeah, no, and that's absolutely right. And I agree with that statement too, Russ. Obviously, the offensive line, you have to give a shout out for their performance, because you look down, Russ, Towson only had one quarterback hurry. The offensive line allowed 0 sacks. So Brendan Sorsby stayed pretty clean for the most part of this game. He didn't really take any hits. He really looked poised, though, Russ. I mean, we even asked him about the first quarter. I mean, when you start a game 8 for 9 with 200 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air, and then you also run for 1, you're off to a great start. But overall, that was probably one of the best performances we've seen from a quarterback in recent years. Obviously, Desmond Ridder had a lot of great performances as well, but looking down at the stats right now, that was a top 10 performance by all quarterbacks across the FBS this week. Brendan Sorsby, 22 for 31, completing 71% of his passes, 383 yards, averaging nearly 12.4 yards per play. So the longest was a 61-yard touchdown to Sterling Burkhalter. But overall, Russ, he really looked poised in the pocket. And, I mean, it was also nice to see, Russ, too, that you found a young quarterback, despite only starting 7 games from a season ago, but was able to lock in and physically go through his progressions. He wasn't just firing to the first guy there.
Good point, Neil.
And that was a great sight to see, because, Russ, I made it a point to ask Brendan Sorsby what he saw on the touchdown to Sterling Burkhalter there after the game. And he even said it. He was like, Sterling wasn't even the guy that they were looking for on that play. He goes, Coach even said it was like, he even made the reference and joke about it. He goes, well, I hope Coach isn't mad that I threw a touchdown on this play, because we weren't even supposed to throw the ball to Sterling here. So overall,
and Neil, that was like a 4-second deep read, right? He was about 4 seconds in the play, and Burkhalter was wide. That was the wide open touchdown, right, on the left side. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was on the RPO rolling out to the left. I mean, that was a wide open play, but it was just great to see him physically sit in the pocket and be able to process his developments and his progressions. Like, that was something Cincinnati really struggled with a year ago. Like last year, if the first progression wasn't there, we hate to say it, but Emory Jones is taking off with that ball and using his legs, trying to do a little bit too much there in the run game. So overall, it was great to see that open up. But it was also, too, Russ, really great to see Brendan Sorsby find a way to use his legs when needed to. Obviously, the big play in the first quarter, the missed snap there by Gavin Gerhardt, takes him out of the red zone there. And then the very next play, Scott Satterfield calls the design quarterback run where he walks it in from 13 yards out. That's the confidence that they have in Brendan Sorsby, which is great to have. Obviously, I thought Brendan Sorsby probably had one of the better Cincinnati debuts that many have seen in a while. Obviously, anytime you throw for 383 yards and only have 9 incompletions, and Russ, he didn't try to force the ball either. That was the thing. You mentioned the 4 or 5 incompletions. Yeah, he had a 4 or 5 of those that kind of sailed high or were just off the mark.
Yeah, they were almost all overthrows, just making sure he didn't put it in harm's way, but kind of still giving his athlete a chance if they could get there.
Yeah, and then absolutely, that was the biggest thing. And then, as you mentioned, too, on the deep ball, we knew what we were going to get from Xavier Henderson there at the wide receiver position, but the deep ball, Russ, that he connected to on that 42-yard touchdown, you got to give credit where credit is due, and that ball was a beauty. He dropped that in a bucket for Xavier Henderson. To see that happen, and then you mentioned it as well, the impact of Joe Royer. I mean, we saw it all throughout fall camp of him making these wow plays left and right. But to see him finally get that opportunity to go out in Nippert Stadium, and it was a great point by Scott Springer of the Enquirer that he even mentioned Joe Royer's 5 receptions on Saturday was more than he had during his tenure at Ohio State. So to see him get that confidence level back is so huge for this offense. Obviously, they have big things planned for Joe Royer there at the tight end position, but anytime you have a physical specimen of 6'5", 250, can go out wide, can run, can block, can do a lot of different things, it unlocks the offense. And I mean, Russ, I think none of us expected a 6'5", 255 tight end to go and clear somebody on a hurdle on the outside.
Yeah, he was like, I've never done that in my life. It just came to me.
I don't think anybody expected that, but now like he's got the ability to where he can go out, he can take a screen pass, he can go run with it, he can make plays in the open space. But they got a big time target in Joe Royer, so it's really going to be exciting to see that develop there. And it's going to be interesting to see how that unlocks the wide receivers too. Obviously, with a guy like Xavier Henderson, Sterling Burkhalter, Aaron Turner, Tony Jefferson, or Tony Johnson, who's ever there at that wide receiver position, it's going to be interesting. But I think the offense right now, like you have a stalwart of an offensive line that returns everybody from a season ago, despite Phil Wilder missing this one due to injury. I think that offensive line still had probably one of the best performances in a while for that offensive line. I mean, last year they were a great offensive line, but when you have a performance like that in week 1, and this is after DeAndre Buford missed some time for heading up to this one, he just ramped back up. So that was a great sight to see that. I thought he had a decent showing there at the right tackle position, but it was great to see the offensive line really, really wall up there and allow the time in the pocket to be there for Brendan Sorsby. So that was a great sight to see from the offensive side of the ball.
Joe Royer, I believe, was top 10 nationally in overall receiving yards among FBS tight ends this week. Good thing to build on. Some good things to build on offensively for this UC team. I love the opening script. They go touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. Can't start a game much better than that. 21-3 lead. You give your offense and you give your defense kind of that set knowing, hey, we can lean on them here. We can bring some pressure. We can start to run the ball a little bit more and really start to milk this game away. And then, Neil, like you mentioned, Brendan Sorsby, I thought it was just a really strong opening performance, a nice way to on-ramp into his UC career, heading into a game against Pitt coming up. 2 big-time throws in the game, 80% adjusted completion percentage on PFF. They had him with 2 drops from his receivers, so that'll do. That will do, to say the least. Quick time out here, and then we'll get to some more news and notes before we wrap up the show. Cincinnati turns their sights, Neil, to the Pitt Panthers. We'll do a full dive into the preview on this game coming up later in the week. But overall, looking at the betting spread, we have that right now, and it is taking some Pitt money to start off. They were 2.5-point favorites to start the week, Neil, or to start Sunday morning, and then things quickly went to the Pitt side, moving to 1.5 points. Or excuse me, they were a 2-point favorite, and it moved to 1.5 points in a couple hours after that. 54 points was the point total at the open, Neil, and now that's moved all the way up to 59.5. I would be a little shocked if it doesn't move to the 60-plus margin here by kickoff. ESPN gives Pitt a 56.9% chance to win this game, and Cincinnati obviously a 43.1% chance. Pitt destroyed Kent State. They covered the spread 55-24 over the Golden Flashes at home earlier this weekend. Eli Holstein got the reins, and he wowed, Neil. 30 of 40, 333 yards, 3 touchdowns, and Pitt's defense was fantastic. 212 total yards allowed. They forced 2 turnovers to even out the turnover battle. This is looking like it could be a daunting matchup, and one that I have no clue who's going to win this game, Neil. This is a really tough one. These are 2 teams that you could argue are basically neck and neck in almost every category you stand them up against each other in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Russ, that's a great thing, as you mentioned, because obviously Pitt had the question marks surrounding what that quarterback position would be like. And I mean,
looking like Eli going to be the guy.
Yeah, Eli's going to be the guy after the performance he had there versus Kent State. But Russ, overall, this could be a game that could go either way. Obviously, you mentioned the point total jumping to 59. Frankly, if it's me right now, early projections, Russ, I think we see that number climb to the 60 range. And it would not shock me if you come Saturday and you see a 60-point performance between both of these teams, especially after the weekends they had. I mean, we saw the kind of offensive firepower that Cincinnati was able to put up versus Towson. Then you saw what Pitt was able to do versus Kent State. But overall, I think you're going to see that number hit the over 59. I would not be surprised if you see that number climb to maybe 61, 62 by game time on Saturday. But Russ, as you mentioned, this is truly a game that could go either way. If Pitt plays like how they played on Saturday versus Kent State, it could be interesting. Despite without their number 1 running back, it could be a situation, and we'll break more of that situation down on the later show this week of our Pitt preview. But This could be a game, Russ, where Pitt is that 1.5 point favorite, and we might be sitting at an even line heading into Saturday. You never know, but it's going to be a game where it could be a pick 'em heading in there. So it's going to be interesting to see what the draft experts think on Saturday there at Nippert Stadium. Obviously, too, Russ, worth noting, this is the game where for Pitt's first time back at Nippert Stadium since that 2008 season, they'll honor the 2008 BCS team here at Nippert Stadium. So it's going to be great to see those guys back, but it could go either way. So I'm excited for Saturday.
Yeah, we'll have a full kind of thoughts on practice on Thursday, get the latest update on Dante Corleone, and get thoughts from Scott Satterfield and more in his midweek press conference. The replacement for Kenny Hammond Jr., people, Desmond Reed, the kind of speedy junior 5'8" running back from Pitt. Oh, just a ho-hum, 14 carries, 145 yards, and 1 touchdown against Kent State. He could be a problem if Cincinnati doesn't bring the pain to him physically. We'll dive into more of that in the Pitt matchup coming up on Bearcat Blitz later in the week. We are presented by Bet Online. Enjoy your Labor Day, everybody.
6, Ritter to the end zone, looking for Pierce. Did he hang on? Yes. Touchdown. Back as I've been around. Here he goes again. Busts free. Jerome Ford down the sideline. Foot race. House call. Touchdown. 79 yards. Big run in the Peach Bowl. This is a big one, too. And it's going to go all the way to the house on the first